All right, I think I will get started with our program just to keep in mind of everyone's time. So good evening, hello, my name is Sarah Salto and I am a museum educator with the Best Bauer Dunn Museum of Lake County, which if you're unfamiliar with it, is part of the Lake County Forest Preserves. Thank you for joining us tonight and for the first half of the 9th annual Lake County History Symposium. This year's theme is Good Neighbors Making a Difference in Lake County. So the stories that you hear tonight will be of individuals and organizations that have made significant contributions to society and work to make communities better places. So tonight, like I mentioned, is the first half of the symposium. And we have 3 presentations that will each be 20 to 30 minutes each. And at the end of each presentation, there will be some time for questions and a little bit of engagement. And then after all 3 presentations, we'll kind of shift focus and look at a whole larger picture and invite everyone to talk and participate a little bit more. So the presentations tonight, like I mentioned, focuses on good neighbors, but we will be looking at groups of people or organizations who might be considered good neighbors. And if you want to join us for night 2 for the second part of the History Symposium, the topics for night 2 will be focusing on individuals. And we will share the link in the chat for those of you who want to join us on the second night of the Lake County History Symposium. I also want to mention that tonight's program is sponsored by USG, which makes it a free program for all. USG sponsors programming and free admission to the Dunn Museum located in Libertyville every first and third Thursday of the month. So it's a great time to come visit the Dunn Museum if you've never been before, as it's free and there's always some kind of programming going on every first and third Thursday, which is why the next one isn't until January 18th, the second night. So just to give you a little bit background on the Dunn Museum, if you are unfamiliar with the museum, we are located in Libertyville, and we feature permanent exhibits from Lake County history, all the way from prehistoric times to present day. In addition to our permanent galleries, we have temporary exhibition space with rotating topics. And right now we do have a dinosaur exhibit on display until January 15th, which is a great thing to take people who love dinosaurs to. In addition to the actual physical location of the Dunn Museum, we have virtual exhibits and a YouTube page. And all this information we will be sharing in our chat with you. And you can feel free to explore more about how to visit us and our resources that we offer. And I would like to officially now begin the 9th annual Lake County History Symposium. The Lake County History Symposium brings together those interested and actively interested in researching the history of Lake County, Illinois. The goal of this program is to share and present original research done by professional and history enthusiasts to provide a deeper understanding of local history and recognize its significance in a broader context. So we hope by doing these presentations that you learn more about local history, the importance of Lake County and our surrounding area, and find new opportunities to visit local historical sites and museums. We're so rich in the history that we have here, and there's so many hidden gems and fun museums to go to throughout the whole county, and we really want to showcase the history of this area. Okay, so I think with that, I want to bring on our first presentation of the evening, Building a Healthy Community by Marina, Mayne. And Marina Mayne is the Registrar and Public Educator at the Raupp Museum in Buffalo Grove. She holds a BA in Anthropology from the University of Michigan and an MA in Museology from the University of Washington. Marina has worked in many different museums over the past 10 years and enjoys finding ways to make connections in history more accessible to the public. So thank you, Marina. I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Sarah, for the introduction. I'm excited to be here today. And I'm really excited to talk with everyone about an organization that made a great difference in our Buffalo Grove community in the 1960s and 1970s. And that organization that I'm going to talk about is the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club. And the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club, which you can see a picture here on the right from the 1960s. The Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club was founded in 1961. And here's the logo that they came up with. They drew a little logo for their organization. But it's really important to take a step back before we talk about the club itself, to what was going on around the time the club was formed, because it really had a great influence on why the women in Buffalo Grove and Wheeling felt that they needed to create a nurses club. So I put up a timeline here of just some important events going around at this time. So we look back 1939 to 1945, World War II was happening, although the United States entered the war in 1941. And then shortly after World War II, the Cold War starts. So there's this building tension between Russia and the United States. And this gave rise to a lot of civil defense measures. And civil defense was people thinking about the ways that they can be prepared for an attack from Russia at home here in the United States. And it was these ideas that were circulating around that gave rise to the Nurses Club. And so when you're thinking about civil defense and what that means, it's things that you can do within your community to make it safer. It could be building air raid shelters. It could be having more access to health services, safety, first aid. All of these things were what people were considering during this time, even such as our President Truman when he signed the Federal Civil Defense Act in 1950, providing funding for building shelters and providing more civil defense measures. Now, I've also put up here a couple of the main focuses of civil defense and some of the things that were on the minds of the nurses in Buffalo Grove at this time. There was the duck and cover movement, and on the left there we have Bert the Turtle, who was the spokesperson for the duck and cover movement, and educating people about how to be prepared in case of an attack, in case of a nuclear attack. And then on the right there is a pamphlet passed around. This is from the Museum of the City of New York that highlights ways that people can be prepared for an attack. And education really targeted women in food preparation and sanitation, safety at home, but also caring for the sick and injured. So these were some really important aspects of education for local communities at this time when they're thinking about Cold War issues and being prepared. Now, Buffalo Grove itself has been a community since about 1850, but the town was not incorporated until about 1958. That was the year so people were living in Buffalo Grove for a long time, but the village itself did not become a village until that time, later in the 1950s. And at the time that the village was incorporated in 1958, there were only 164 people on the census in Buffalo Grove, so it was very small. And here on this map, what I'm sharing with you is the closest hospitals in the 50s to Buffalo Grove. So we had one in Libertyville, Highland Park, Evanston, and Elgin. And so access to medical care was not as widespread as it is today. And so this gave rise in conjunction with civil defense measures and people thinking about safety to the Nurses Club of Buffalo Grove. And I've included here a photo to give an idea of how big Buffalo Grove was. This is an aerial photograph from 1961. And the downtown is circled on the left there. And that was primarily one church, St. Mary's Church, along with a tavern and the general store. That was the downtown. And then on the right there, we had one public school, aside from St. Mary's Church, which was Alcott. And the houses that you see there was the only neighborhood. So that was where most of the 164 people lived in Buffalo Grove at the time. So the founder, here we go. Now Buffalo Grove did have limited medical services. They had a volunteer fire department, just a few individuals, and this was their ambulance in 1961. So they did have one vehicle donated to be an ambulance at this time, and that was it for formal medical services for the town of Buffalo Grove in the late 50s and early 60s. So you can imagine that they were really in need of medical education and medical services. And Jean Starvos here, pictured on the right, she is considered the founder of the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club. Now, Jean, she was a nurse in District 21 schools, and she was noticing all of these issues around her happening. Civil defense measures taking place. She saw the lack of medical services in her area, and she also knew all these other nurses working in schools that she could get together. And so she reached out to other nurses, got an idea of what was important to them, what do they think is missing in their communities. And I just included this quote that she left us here in the early 2000s. She goes, quote, "Remember, this was pre-measles or polio vaccines, pre-paramedics, pre-two-year nursing programs, not ancient history, but the 1960s and 1970s. Now, it is good to note that the measles vaccine actually was introduced in the early 1960s and polio in the late 1950s. So she may have been a little bit off on remembering her dates, but it was still that early time of vaccines. And of course, for her community, no limited paramedics and no nursing programs nearby. Jean reached out to local nurses and they set up a time to meet to discuss forming the Nurses Club. And this was set for September 27th in 1961. And they had their meeting at the Carl Sandburg School, which is in Mundelein. And it was really to talk about the forming of the Nurses Club. Everyone was invited. This is a clipping from a local newspaper so that people could find out and get involved, and everyone was welcome to come and visit. And on that day, on Wednesday night, they met and they actually formed the Nurses Club. They created a constitution. They elected officers for a number of different committees, and they focused their committees on 4 areas: programs, disaster and civil defense, hospitality and membership, and finance. And you'll notice there that civil defense was its own committee. They were still really thinking about civil defense at this time and disaster preparedness, but also about programming for their community. And we're going to go into a little more depth on each of those areas and what the Nurses Club focused on. Now, meetings were planned for once a month, but they still did a lot of other events throughout the year as well. And taken from the Constitution, they outlined their objectives, membership, but also their mission. And the mission was really important. The mission I've highlighted here a little bit: to support and stimulate continuous interest and education in nursing, provide service to the community, and to add to the social needs of these nurses within the community. And I want to highlight those green words there: education being one of the major focuses for the Nurses Club, service to the community, and also the social needs of those nurses, providing a space for the women and the nurses in this club to get together and just lean on each other, discuss nursing, discuss whatever's bothering them. So for the first issue we're going to talk about is education. Now, they addressed creating spaces for education within the community, but also within the nurses group themselves. So the first piece was continuing education for nurses in the Buffalo Grove Wheeling area. That was really important. There was a lot of advancement in medicine during this time and in nursing as a profession. And the Nurses Club women really wanted to know what was going on so that they could stay up to date on everything happening within the medical community. So they hosted medical experts in many different types of medicine from all over the area, even all over the world. They had guests who were visiting the United States from other countries. And they talked about a wide range of health topics. They even would team up with other nurses clubs, such as the McHenry County Nurses Club, to talk about the American Red Cross and disaster solutions. You'll see here we have a couple different other newspaper clippings on a doctor talking about psychiatry and pharmacy, drug facts. There was a wide range of topics that was really important, and they made sure to advertise all of these topics in local newspapers. They wanted local nurses and the community to know what was going on. I've outlined some of the topics that I was able to find just from looking at a number of different newspapers in the local area. So we had optometry, trauma care, drug facts, civil defense, psychology, world health. So everything, whatever you could think of, they were trying to have a talk on to stay up to date on their medical knowledge. Now, aside from the continuing education for the nurses themselves, it was also really important to them to continue nursing as a profession and educate others about being a nurse and helping their community. So pictured here in 1967, one of the members of the Nurses Club is at Jack London Junior High School, and she is there to talk about what nursing is and share opportunities with students about pursuing nursing as a career. And during this time, nursing as a career was undergoing a huge transformation. So this was really important for the Nurses Club of Buffalo Grove. Post-World War II, there was a nursing shortage, and nursing programs were thinking about ways they could expand. They were considering associate degrees. And nursing was a very popular job for women specifically during this time. But even there were some areas where if you got married, you couldn't work. So you couldn't be, even if you were a nurse before, you couldn't work after you were married. So there was a push for better conditions, better pay, better benefits. And the Nurses Club wanted to be a part of that. And they wanted to let people know about nursing as a career and how they could help that change within the nursing profession within their own communities. And I've put this photo here just to highlight that nurses were also taking on a lot more medical advanced techniques and knowledge. So nurses were really important within communities small and large. And the Nurses Club of Wheeling and Buffalo Grove recognized that, and they really wanted to be a part of that and advancing the careers of women and nurses more broadly. So what exactly did they do? They did outreach to schools, but they also raised money for scholarships. And on the right there in 1966 is their first scholarship recipient. Her name was Shirley Parrish, and she ended up graduating from Rockford Memorial in Rockford, Illinois. And the Nurses Club raised funds, and they usually gave around $200 to $300 scholarships per person, which was a significant amount. That could pay for many schools at that time for 1 year of tuition. For example, from a pamphlet in 1954 from the School of Nursing in Maryland, the tuition was $260 a year. So these were really impactful scholarships for women, and it also gave them an avenue into formal education that they may not have before because now they had funding. So here in the early 70s, the other two photos on the left there are newspaper clippings of scholarship recipients from the 1970s. And so as the Nurses Club grew in the 1960s and 1970s, they were able to give more and more scholarships and make more and more impact for students within their communities. And thus more nurses were being trained in the Buffalo Grove and Wheeling area as well, and coming back to their community. Even in 1960, the American Nurses Association introduced the Bachelor for Professional Nursing at that time. And there was really this push for more formal education and training, and in addition to 2-year associate degrees starting to grow in the 1950s. So the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club was making great impact in providing educational opportunities indirectly for these nurses through scholarships. Now, aside from education, that was one of the 3 main parts of the mission of the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club. They also provided services within their community. And one of the big parts of that was the lending closet. Now, the lending closet was an array of medical equipment for loan, wheelchairs, walkers, crutches, and medical beds, things that are expensive at-home medical equipment that people may not be able to afford within their community, but are needed. So on the left there in 1964 is the members of the Nurses Club showing off some of the new equipment that they purchased, the new wheelchair and crutches. And then as well on the right, there are some newspaper clippings highlighting when both the Nurses Club and other members of the community using some of the items that they purchased. And these were really important, both for young and old. And on the left there, Miss Carol Gard, she was in a severe auto accident and she really needed a walker. So the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club provided that for her. And they just amassed a huge array of equipment, and you could loan it for several months, however long you needed it, and then return it. And then someone else within the community would be able to use that equipment. Now, how did they afford all of this equipment? So in addition to, because most of it was bought, they would do a bunch of different auctions, rummage sales, and bake sales. So here on the left and the right are 2 photos from a rummage sale in the 1970s. And they're on the right there, they're auctioning things off. People are getting ready to bid. And these were huge successes within the community. It really got everyone involved in the process of providing items for the lending closet and got more media attention for the Nurses Club too. So these events were really successful, and it helped them purchase items for the lending closet, but also provide donations to local organizations such as medical centers or mental health care facilities so that they could give back to their community in other ways too. Now, another service that these nurses provided was through clinics and basic clinics. So pictured here is a free blood pressure testing that they provided, and they had more than 100 people come out. So if you remember in the beginning of our presentation, the closest hospitals were Elgin, Evanston, Libertyville, Highland Park. So people did not have the greatest access in the late 1950s and early 1960s to medical services in Buffalo Grove. So here you could go get basic hypertension tests. You could also donate blood. They did blood banks, so that people could donate blood. So the nurses were really busy in thinking about the ways that they could provide services, direct services to their communities. They even held events. In 1971, they had Nurses Week. And this was actually a statewide event that was happening all over the place. And the nurses of the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Club came up to the presidents of both towns and they asked to do this big event. And both presidents said yes. And so they went forward with hosting a number of different talks and screenings for people the whole week to get them involved in thinking about their health. As I mentioned before, in addition to doing testing, which they did for a number of years, they also donated funds to local organizations. That was one of the other ways from all these sales that they spent the money. So on the right there is a letter to the club thanking them from the Mental Health Association and Clinic Northwest chapter for their donation. So the nurses were thinking, if there is a way that maybe I can't directly help my community, but I want to support mental health within the community, they made sure to provide funds and donate to areas that could provide those services better than they could. Now, lastly, we talked both about education and also about community service and providing community service. But another part of the mission of the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club was the social needs of nurses. And mainly that included having lots of parties. So they really wanted to create a community of women in nursing who shared common interests, supported one another. And so they would have field trips to different medical related facilities, or they might just have a party. So shown here in the 1970s was a party that they were having at one of their local members' houses. And I just wanted to share at the end here a quote from one of the flyers from 1963 that they handed out to all of their members, advertising one of their parties. And they wrote, quote, "Eureka, we found it. A panacea to cure anything and everything that ails you. Symptoms, it doesn't matter. Diagnoses, who cares? There's a snag. It's only a theory and needs testing." And then for why they were having the party, quote, "To let down our hair, get better acquainted, relax, get rid of doldrums or blues. Well, as stated, to cure any ailment in this area." And so this was just another important way that the nurses stayed connected and also were building on supporting their profession, supporting each other, and supporting their community. So I want to thank everyone for their time. And as I mentioned, I am the registrar from the Raupp Museum. We are Buffalo Grove's local history museum. You can come visit us. We are open many times during the week, and I put our website there and my email so that if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
All right, thanks, Marina. That was such an engaging presentation. I really enjoyed hearing about this local group, and I had quite a few questions actually. So I think I'll just ask one or two now, and I'll save some for later and more discussion. What do you think attracted the members more? Do you think it was more of the social aspect and the parties and the advertising, or do you think it was more of the community outreach, that they were doing, the good that they were doing? How do you think they attracted more of their members?
I think it really went back for the beginning members they were worried about community safety and civil defense. That seemed to be on everyone's mind in a lot of the early records. And so I think that it started out as, how can we provide better medical services to our community, because there's not a lot around us.
Yeah.
And those communities were really growing. Buffalo Grove only had 164 individuals in 1958, but by the 1970s, they had 10,000 individuals. So those communities were growing really fast. And they wanted to, for those 2 decades between 1960 and 1979, they wanted to be pioneers in providing that medical knowledge. And I think over time, because they grew so close, it grew into more of just a great community within the nurses themselves too.
Yeah. I had no idea Buffalo Grove started off so small, and now it's huge, and not that long ago either. That's pretty fascinating. Yeah, this highlights how medical services have changed too.
Yeah.
Someone put in the chat too, definitely have changed. And I kind of had a question on that as well. How do you think this club would respond to the pandemic today? And do you think they would have been fascinated to see again how much medical services have changed and how vaccines have changed? How do you think they would provide their education and outreach and services during something like the pandemic that we had.
Oh my gosh, that's such a great question.
It's hard, but
yeah, I think that first and foremost, or on their mind would be twofold. Both the education part, I think they really emphasized having a lot of those talks. So I think that they would just make the continuing education more broad and would have had things open to the public every month about what they could do, or have pamphlets out, pass them out in schools, because a lot of the nurses worked in the school system, so they were really involved in that. And I think also that other piece was providing like the lending closet. So for them, the 2020 version of the lending closet would have included things to help with the pandemic, masks, or
toilet paper.
Yeah, toilet paper. Anything that was important to the community. I think that would have been two of their main things, just because that's what they focused on for 2 decades. In the 1960s and 70s, and I think would have been important for them.
Yeah, I definitely would like to see their education pamphlets and what they would come up with. It would have been interesting to see. Well, I was very inspired by this group and how much work they did in their community, and it was, like I said, just incredible to see this group of women come together. And I have other questions for you too, but I'll hold off on them for a little bit. So I just want to thank you again for presenting tonight, Marina, and we'll bring on our next presenter, Nancy. All right. So hello, Nancy. Thank you for joining us tonight. Nancy Webster will be presenting Good Neighbors, One Act at a Time. And Nancy Webster began working with historical collections in Highland Park in 2010 when she launched the Highland Park Archives and Local History Collections Program with a grant from the National Archives, National Historical Publications, and Records Commission. Since beginning the Community Archives program in a collaboration with the NHPRC, she has written and managed $250,000 in local and Illinois state grants for digitizing and other history and cultural projects. She teaches at Dominican University as an adjunct instructor, currently teaching the Advanced Archives Seminar, and previously she worked at the Bentley Library and the Chicago History Museum and Molex Connector Corporation. She received her MILS and BA from University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. So thank you again, Nancy, for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. When this year's subject was first introduced, I thought about how so many acts come together at once and interlace with trends that are ongoing. So I decided to talk about Good Neighbors, one act at a time, and start with a series of acts related to Highland Park and its development. I'm just starting here with a picture under the title, and this picture is from the Chaplain George Rice collection, and he is sitting here. We're not sure, we don't have a picture of him, what she is, but to the back is Orson Brand. And these two gentlemen provided so much photographic documentation for Highland Park that we use in images and are important parts of our collection. And they became apparently fast friends. Brand lived here most of his adult life, moving from West Deerfield Township, and Chaplain Rice was here just in the early 20th century, but somehow all these photos he took going around the world with the cavalry and the infantry that were generally at Fort Sheridan, he collected these great photos that we use, and they used their friendship to even develop further. I think maybe that Rice must have entrusted his glass slides to Brand, because that's how they seem to have come to us at Highland Park. Now, of course, we're starting at a point when Highland Park was founded in 1869 as an Illinois municipality. Before that, for many years, glaciation carved out what is the moraines and ravines of Highland Park. And before that, Native Americans lived here for many years and were removed by the Treaty of 1833, the Treaty of Chicago. And these are all parts of the Highland Park Historical Society collections. So we look here, we see a map of Highland Park, 1872. And the bottom, you can see that it is Cleveland and French, who are landscape architects that platted this out. Now, Cleveland and French were only together as a partnership for about 10 years, from about 1871 to 1881, but they wanted to preserve Highland Park, and they were able to do this because at the same time, Illinois enacted the City and Village Act of 1872 to give cities opportunity, and they chose to design Highland Park streets to accentuate the rolling landscapes or ravines and wooded forests, giving us today the layout, thinking about what they wanted to preserve in the beauty of Highland Park. So we talk about things that mark a community, and one of them is heroism. In 1899, there was a very icy year on the lake, and people were doing lots of excursions, venturing out on icebergs and floes, Kodakers walking around. But sometimes it didn't quite go as planned, and people got stranded. And in 1889, that was one of those cases. And sometimes people did not survive and were not rescued. But in this case, 10 boys, really young men from Lake Forest College, were out on a lake flow with their Kodak cameras, having a great time when their iceberg ice floe broke away and went floating down Lake Michigan. And Lake Forest couldn't rescue them. Fort Sheridan couldn't rescue them, and they floating down towards Lake Michigan. And there, three men came together. All three of them were born in the 1860s. And this is the medal from one of them, Fred Perryman, to help rescue these 10 young men that were stranded. And they were stranded overnight. It was a very long rescue process. And so what these people, they did was go out and row out, and one by one, iceful, bring back all 10 boys. And these are the three men that worked together, and they were all born. The only thing they have in common is they were all born in the 1860s. Fred Perryman was a gardener, and he was born in England, and he was the hired man at an estate on Moraine. Milton Baker, I think this is Milton Baker, we're not quite sure, but we do believe it is, was the first graduate of Highland Park High School. He became a doctor and then a businessman, and his family was very active in the Society of Highland Park. The third person that participated in this rescue, going out very far into the lake to bring back these 10 people stranded on an ice floe, was someone called Louis Van Ripper, who was kind of a man about town. He has his car, he sold steam car engines. He seems to disappeared at some point. I think he went to jail. His wife was still in town, and he used to kind of make a show when he was alderman of going out and putting on a wetsuit and diving into the pipes to make sure the water was coming in properly. But in any case, these men heard the call of this unrescuable ice floe to be rescued and went down together and brought these boys in. And that really brought the community together and introduced people that would not have necessarily known each other in Highland Park. I believe there's also a plaque near Lake Forest College, as all of these young men were students at the college when they went on their adventure floating down Lake Michigan. Other ways that good neighbors make community is creating something together. In this case, this is a wagon wheel quilt. It was made of one of two women's groups, probably either the Evangelical or the Baptist Church. And the way it worked is and there's almost 600 names on it. Someone would have a wheel, their name would be in the middle, and they'd get subscriptions to pay for making the piece of the wheel, putting together a quilt that they create together and raise money for a charity. And of course, quilts play a role in that and have in this country since the 19th century, when quilts are recreated to memorize things and continue to be so. An example is the AIDS quilt or the Highland Park sesquicentennial quilt that hangs at a city building. Another way that communities, and then these are trends, quilts were a trend, people creating quilts together, people volunteering in schools. The PTA as a national organization was founded in 1897, and it caught on. And at first it was largely mothers who wanted to join in and participate. And they did that at Elm Place School, which was a very progressive school and had a progressive photographer, another photographer, amateur photographer in Highland Park, who created a great record for us. And in this picture, and there was a small Quebecois community in Highland Park, mostly artisans living not too far from Elm Place. And Celestine and her daughter and her grandchildren demonstrated what even in 1912 was an old-timey kind of local history kind of thing, would come in and demonstrate how to spin and what it was for. and they all grew up in Highland Park. Jeremy became a carpenter, Mary became a nun, and it shows a way how people can go and share skills and become part of the community in the schools. One of our favorite examples, and we've talked about them in sessions before, is the Asoli Club. The Asoli Club was founded by women of the Highland Park Club in 1894, kind of somewhat of a rebellion, and they wanted to have a women's club, and they did. And one thing they did was there was no public beach in Highland Park at the time, and they raised funds to have a public beach, which started in 1911. And they brought the community together. They created a community cookbook to raise funds. They used the Young Men's Club from the Highland Park Club for lifeguards. They hired a bathing master, and they ultimately evolved, moving from a public space to a private space to the park district. So basically what they did, they went in the public sphere, they used public spaces, thought about public safety, and ultimately, as the Highland Park District developed and public lands, it became a park district endeavor. But it was these women who went out and raised the money and found the lifeguards and bought the equipment to make sure that there was a place where children could come and play in the summer and cool down a little bit too. In the same vein, and about the same time, is the Highland Park Women's Hospital Auxiliary. The Highland Park Hospital opened in 1918, and as we heard in the last presentation, there were not a lot of hospitals around. Previously in Highland Park, there were some doctor's offices and a few small hospitals, really in private homes. And so in the early 20th century, Highland Park started raising money, which they did. And in fact, one donation of $10,000, which would be more than $200,000 today, was made to really get this starting. But the women wanted to again enter in the public sphere and be part of this, and they created an auxiliary. And one woman, that Adele Lobel, who was living at Highland Park at the time, had worked with the auxiliary at Hahnemann's Hospital. And by 1921, they had an auxiliary that was part of the General Federation of Women's Club and had a community store. They rolled bandages, they raised money, they comforted people, did all kinds of things, and were very active. And just a few years ago with blood drives and their thrift shop. And it was a big part of the fabric. And here we have some things showing people participating, some pins and a patch, and they were from a woman who was very active in the auxiliary, Jean Raupp, donated by her son. And this is a way that was, as medical moved forward and participating in that and bringing medicine to your community and making sure your community has those medical resources. We're going to jump subjects here to a favorite son of Highland Park, Elisha Gray, who's we know mostly because he took Alexander Graham Bell all the way to the Supreme Court to fight his patent for the telephone, when in fact, poor Mr. Meucci, the Italian, had done it in Cuba years ago. But what we forget sometimes when talking about the telephone, Elisha Gray in Highland Park may have had the very first music broadcast ever, and that was from the Presbyterian Church in 1874. And here is a program from that 1874 presentation at the Presbyterian Church and broadcasts. He also invented a device called the telautograph, and it was a kind of early fax machine. And he saw that, and here's a picture of, this is the Gray Electric Company. Gray also electrified the North Shore. He had a factory on the south side of Highland Park. But this telautograph was really a very significant invention because people could sign things, whether in the hospital and the bank, to authentify things. And we know the very first fax sent in Highland Park in 1892. Gray received many patents for this, and you can see these kind of reminds you of the faxes not too long ago, a little bit faded, but you can see that they sent it through and the handwriting. And it was an invention that was well used. It was used into the 1940s. This is the picture of someone using the telautograph in Union Station to communicate. We'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Ravinia. Ravinia, of course, is the home of the Chicago Symphony. They first played there very early on in the early years of Ravinia Park, but it was a part of the electric railroads, various amusement parks around the country. and in Highland Park. They tried the Chicago-Milwaukee Railway publicized. Of course, for those of you that don't realize it, was an electric railway running throughout many places in Illinois, in this country. There's a line running almost parallel to the current Metro line, and they founded Highland Park. And they wanted to have distinctive type of electric railway music, and they did. And they were very successful. And they had other similar places. There's one at Fort Sheridan, there's one in Wheeling, and amusement parks. But Ravinia took on a little bit of a different edge. And when the railroad went to receivership and when the funding was ceasing for this kind of club, this amusement park, the Highland Park citizens really worked to make sure that it continued. And it continued with this great opera series, a grand opera with people donating. But there was one man, Louis Eckstein, who very early on became into the efforts to make sure Ravinia continued as it does now as the home of the Chicago Symphony. And he did it by propagating, by raising money, by donating millions of dollars of his own money to make sure that Ravinia became what it is today, including buying the land. And here was this very nice illuminated manuscript that was created after his death by the board. And it just had many names, like many organizations. It was Ravinia Club, Ravinia Company, Ravinia Association, now Ravinia Festival, to thank him for everything he did to provide, to create Ravinia, a place that is still the home of the Chicago Symphony and very much a cultural center on the North Shore. I started off talking about how Highland Park was developed landscape-wise to make it reflect the beauty of the surroundings. And that they did. And they also, that continued as time went on. There was an alderman on the streets and alley committee who made sure that Highland Park continued to have beautiful streets and alleys. And that's how the ways in Central Avenue today has this lovely boulevard that he advocated for. Jesse Lo Smith, whose photography we saw just a little while ago, he recognized early on the importance of the environment. And we have these beautiful pictures of milkweed and bees. And he talked about the importance of diversity and pollinators and plants. And we're talking about that today, jump forward more than 100 years, and we have the Go Green Highland Park doing many of the same things. And it comes full circle too. I just want to thank you for listening, and it's going to still be doing that. And you can see here's a picture of a boulevard in Highland Park in the late 19th century, taken from one of our beautiful glass slides. In this case, we don't know the photographer. And here is a picture of that Jesse Lo Smith created, and he had women hand coloring it to, in this case, Grace Nichols. He upset she got a little bit colored away when she painted this picture with the clouds and the colors, and taking up the same mantle to promote the use of milkweed. Now today is Go Green Highland Park, and this program for this exhibit and these stories was funded by Highland Park Community Foundation. Here is a bibliography for anyone who's interested, and thank you. Here's our website, highlandparkhistory.com, and how to contact us. Thank you.
All right, Nancy, thank you for your presentation. It was fun to see, hear all these individuals and groups coming together to make Highland Park unique. So my first question for you is kind of based off that, is what made Highland Park this unique place to have all these different groups and people influence? Like, what makes Highland Park unique, I guess, for all these
Well, there was a series of things that made it unique. It was choosing to keep the natural landscape of the moraines and ravines. It was the choice to let Jewish families come live there without prejudice. It was the choice to support Ravinia. It was the choice to develop schools and fund schools. And there's a very conscious movement near the end of the 19th century when all these families, these very wealthy families, came and spent the summer in Highland Park, and then they left. So you had a whole nother, what I consider the first wave of white settlers to Highland Park. The farmers and the shopkeepers would have a huge drop in their sales, and they wanted people to stay there. So the leaders made sure to have good schools. So you don't go out east to prep school. You don't go back home to Chicago. You stay around and attend the schools, to have churches and community, to really a very conscious concept to develop a community and be a welcoming community.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I appreciate that. All right. Well, thank you so much, Nancy, for your presentation, and we'll have more questions for Nancy later. And with that, I will invite our final presenter to come on. Our final presentation is It Must and Will Come by Ty Rohr. Ty is the manager of cultural arts for the Waukegan Park District. In his capacity with the Park District, he works on behalf of Waukegan's history as liaison and historian with the Waukegan Historical Society. Ty is the treasurer of the Illinois State Historical Society, as well as the immediate past chairs of the City of Waukegan's Historic Preservation Commission and the Waukegan Arts Council. Ty received Bachelor of Arts degrees in both history and anthropology from the University of Illinois. He obtains a Master of Arts in history from the University of Illinois Springfield. So thank you again, Ty, for being here, and I'm excited to hear your final presentation tonight.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Good evening, everyone. And we conclude tonight's session exploring the significant contributions from the early years of the Waukegan Women's Club. And we will see how these first contributions to make Waukegan better are still impacting and influencing the community today. And the story starts on February 19th, 1894. 12 women gathered at the home of Ida Price Fisher. And they had been meeting previously, and the topic of an organized club had come up. It was decided that night to create a club using the bylaws patterned after the Amaranth Club in New Albany, Indiana. Mrs. Fisher was elected the first president, and dues were set at 50 cents for that year. The following week, the group was still trying to figure out what they would like their club's name to be. Suggestions included Acorn, Unity, Weekly, Pioneer, Monday, and Sesame. Ultimately, it was decided that the group would call themselves the Sesame Club. The Sesame Club was first organized as a literary study club with members presenting on various and diverse readings followed by group discussions. The founders of the Sesame Club sought to learn and teach each other new knowledge through literature on assorted topics including science, religion, politics, and poetry. Music later became an integral part of the club too. The club quickly evolved, though, to find ways to help better the individual advancement of Waukegan's citizens. After a month, the group's intentions changed from seeking self-advancement to an endeavor to move Waukegan past the small library reading rooms that had limited success and access, and to establishing a free public library. Within the next year, the Sesame Club grew to 21 members, with each woman taking an active part in creating public interest in a free public library. Many, though, thought that what the Sesame Club was presenting was a radical idea. People laughed at the thought that Waukegan could have a free library. The response from the Sesame Club was simply, "It must and will come." Through the efforts of the members of the Sesame Club, on July 11, 1895, the Waukegan Library Association was incorporated and a new public reading room opened. Gradually, more of the leading citizens in Waukegan began to take an interest in the work of the club, with many joining as board members for the Library Association. Books were donated to the Library Association by citizens, other clubs, and board members. They were first kept in a room in the Slyfield block on Washington Street, then on Genesee Street. Both areas were in downtown Waukegan. The club members served as librarians, and they personally kept the library open 2 days a week for almost a full year. Through lectures and varied entertainment, the club maintained all the expenses of the library and added more books to the shelves. The library came to be acknowledged by the people of Waukegan and having established it on a firm basis, the Sesame Club deemed it the duty and privilege of the city of Waukegan to now support it. The board of the Library Association concurred and resolved on March 14, 1898, for the library to be transferred to the city, with a committee formed to help support that transfer. The Sesame Club had successfully done their job in convincing the city and the citizens of Waukegan that a library was not only feasible, but desirable. With the collection of books from the Waukegan Library Association now in control of the city, a permanent building was needed. The question now was how to fund the construction of a library building. It was time to reach out to the patron saints of libraries, Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie was an icon of the American industrial age, amassing a fortune in the steel industry. Carnegie had the belief that it was the obligation of the wealthy to use their surplus capital to assist in raising the living standards of the poor, and he chose to build public libraries. Carnegie wrote, "I choose free public libraries as the best agencies of improving the masses of the people, because they give nothing for nothing. They only help those who help themselves. They reach the aspiring, and open to these the chief treasures of the world, those stored up in books." Waukegan reached out to Carnegie, and $25,000 would be given for the construction of the library, as long as the city supported it with tax money equal to 10% of the gift, and also provided land for the building to be constructed on. Details were figured out, Carnegie's money was granted, and construction on the public library in Waukegan took less than 1 year to complete. The library was dedicated on October 1st, 1903. The Waukegan Daily Sun described the dedication as a pleasant day where the public schools dismissed early and many stores closed early, so everyone could attend the ceremony. The Waukegan Public Library then opened to the citizens of Waukegan for the first time. Its first books were the original collections from the Sesame Club's reading room. Copies of early records of the Sesame Club were also placed in the cornerstone of the library, and it was stated that it was through the vision and untiring efforts of the club that the library was dedicated at 1 North Sheridan Road. With the success of building a permanent public library, the Sesame Club now looked to other areas of society to improve. The members of the club now turned their focus and attention to preserving Waukegan's natural environment, as well as providing recreational opportunities. The Sesame Club realized the need for Waukegan to establish a formal park system. The city was growing with people coming from all over the world to work at the new lakefront factories. The Sesame Club wanted to ensure that beautiful lands would be reserved as parks for current and future generations to enjoy. The first attempts at organizing a park district in Waukegan failed, as a referendum was voted down. Undeterred, the Sesame Club, along with other civic leaders and entities, continued to push for a park district. Around 1905, the Sesame Club, under the guidance of their president, Marion Upton, hired renowned Chicago architectural firm Perkins and Hamilton, and they were to develop a comprehensive park plan for Waukegan. The Perkins Plan, as it was called, was presented to the citizens of Waukegan in 1906. The architects estimated that the plan could be fully realized and completed in around 60 years at the cost of $250,000. The Perkins Plan included many things, and I have pulled out a few highlights for you. At the lakefront, any factories with no use for shipping facilities would be moved inland. A new lagoon was to be built for yachts and pleasure craft. Folding bridges would be added to the 2 governmental piers to allow people to more easily access both sides of the harbor mouth. And the plan even called for the construction of a casino at the lakefront. The main focus of the plan, though, was for the preservation of the Waukegan ravine system. The ravines would first be acquired and broad drives would be built down in them. This would allow participants to wind through the ravines, and it would provide recreational and commercial areas below the main street level. With the comprehensive Perkins Plan complete, the Sesame Club still found it difficult, though, to gain public support for a formal park system. The women of the Sesame Club continued on with their efforts to improve the recreation opportunities in Waukegan. Just like before, where they started their own reading room and library association, the Sesame Club established a bathing beach and bathhouse on the lakefront. The members of the Sesame Club maintained and operated that bathhouse. There, people could rent baskets, towels, even bathing suits, and they could also get refreshments. The Sesame Club did not make money on this project, nor were they trying to. Its purpose was to aid in the recreational opportunities of both children and adults of Waukegan. In 1912, the Sesame Club became federated nationally. It would change its name to the Waukegan Women's Club, beginning in the year 1913. That would turn out to be a very big year. The year 1913 was a time of major change for many women throughout the United States. The women's suffrage movement was gaining strength, and many states, including Illinois, now granted women the right to vote on certain matters, offices, and issues. The Waukegan Women's Club had been an important driver in the push locally for women's suffrage. These women had been instrumental already with helping to push for positive change throughout Waukegan, especially with the creation of the public library. But now they could do even more at the polls. Looking through the early newspapers around this time, many articles share a similar sentiment in that the women only wanted the right to vote, but they didn't really actually want to vote. The first vote that Waukegan women participated in concerned the streetcar franchise in the city. Well, that day, women were lined up outside of their polling stations before the polls even opened. It was immediately realized that women were going to vote. With women now voting, it reopened opportunities for past issues that had been voted down. Now, these issues could potentially pass. Of most concern was the idea that local prohibition could get passed. It did, but that is another story for another time. On December 26, 1916, for the first time, women had the opportunity to vote yes to the creation of the Waukegan Park District. Finally, after many years of pushing for the Park District by the Waukegan Women's Club, the vote passed overwhelmingly at a number of 4-1. Of the 459 votes cast for the forming of the district, over half were made by women. With the creation of a formal park system realized in Waukegan, the Women's Club turned over the Perkins Plan to the Park Board of Commissioners. Much of that plan was never able to be implemented. However, some of the earliest actions of the Waukegan Park District was acquiring the lands outlined in the plan, specifically ones that had ravines. Today, you can visit beautiful Roosevelt, Washington, and Powell parks thanks to the foresight and vision of the Waukegan Women's Club. And aside from the earliest parks, the Waukegan Park District has grown to a total of 53 properties covering more than 740 acres of land today. It is a nationally recognized park district in excellence and a true pillar of Waukegan. It is everything and more than what the Waukegan Women's Club originally envisioned. The Waukegan Women's Club is still active to this day, and there is much more to their story. But back to the original Waukegan Public Library building on Sheridan Road. By the early 1960s, many were calling for a new library to be built. When the library had opened in 1903, Waukegan had 9,426 citizens, but by 1963, the population had grown to over 57,000. Over its 60 years of operations, the volumes of books had grown from 5,138 to 80,901. This left the library very overcrowded. Studies found that the books in circulation were above adequate for the size of the city. However, spaces that were not originally designated as stack space were now full of stored books. The library also lacked open space for community gatherings, lectures, and events. One citizen put it regarding the need for a new library, books are spewing all over the place. A library referendum was passed on April 27th, 1963, for Waukegan to build a new $1.25 million library facility. The new library opened on December 27, 1965, on the southwest corner of Clayton and County Streets in downtown Waukegan. Following the move of the Waukegan Public Library, the Waukegan Carnegie, as it was now more frequently being referred to as, had few activities occurring there. For a time, the building was used for USO and other community activities like a haunted house. But really, since 1981, the Waukegan Carnegie Library has stood vacant, but not forgotten. In January of 1992, in a surprise vote, the Waukegan City Council approved to take bids for the Waukegan Carnegie's demolition. This spurred action by community members to find a way to save this cherished building. The Carnegie Preservation Project Incorporated formed, and community members led a successful effort to acquire the building and spare it from the wrecking ball. The Carnegie Preservation Project, along with city support, was able to raise funds and support to help stabilize the building for the future, a future for when an end use could be found. After much hard work and dedication by the Carnegie Preservation Project, the city of Waukegan granted local landmark status to the building under the city's Historic Preservation Ordinance in 2005. Adding to the historical significance of the Waukegan Carnegie Library, it was placed on the National Register of Historic Places on December 13, 2013. Still, with the historic significance recognized both on local and national levels, the Waukegan Carnegie sat dark, waiting for the opportunity to be truly saved and used by the community again. Many looked at the Waukegan Carnegie Library with great optimism, wondering what they could do to help that iconic building. The story of the Waukegan Carnegie Library has always been one of community involvement and support. Just as the Sesame Club expressed hope in 1894 that Waukegan would eventually have a free public library, many in Waukegan believed in their hearts that the Waukegan Carnegie would one day be vibrant and used again. It must and will come. In 2018, Waukegan Historical Society board members and Waukegan Park District staff began quiet discussions with a charitable foundation about the Waukegan Carnegie. Up to that point, the Society and Park District had been working in partnership on raising funds to build an addition onto the History Museum in Bowen Park. The question arose regarding the viability of the Waukegan Carnegie potentially housing the expanded history operations of both the Society and Park District. In 2019, a feasibility study was completed by Harbo Architects, one of the most recognized preservation architectural firms in the country. The study concluded that the Waukegan Carnegie, once restored, would provide all of the uses proposed by the Society and District. At the end of October 2019, the Society received word that the charitable foundation was supporting the Carnegie Restoration Initiative with a $5 million grant. This money, along with money from ongoing Society fundraising, other grants and gifts, as well as a commitment from the Waukegan Park District Board of Commissioners, allowed the Carnegie Restoration Project to move full steam ahead. On August 13th, 2020, ownership of the Waukegan Carnegie Library was transferred to the Waukegan Park District. The project broke ground on October 18th, 2022. Construction continues, and each day brings us closer to completion. We are excited to bring back to life this iconic Waukegan landmark. The outreach and support for the Waukegan Park District and Waukegan Historical Society's initiative has been truly amazing. The doors of the historic Waukegan Carnegie Library will be open again soon for all in the community to enjoy. The result will be a landmark building in downtown Waukegan that we know will help revitalize the area. The Carnegie will be what it was always intended to be, an education center. This time, though, focusing on Waukegan's history, culture, and environment. It is a wonderful marriage of the two major initiatives of the Waukegan Women's Club from its earliest days: a permanent library building and the Park District. We are proud to be realizing the dream of so many to restore the old library and to help continue the legacy of the Waukegan Women's Club and to help make the community better. In the words of the Sesame Club, it must and will come. The Waukegan History Museum at the Carnegie, coming later this year.
All right, Ty, thank you so much again for this inspirational presentation. I loved tying it all back into your work that you're doing today. That was very incredible to hear. So we did get a few questions in the chat while you were talking. So one of the first questions, and I believe this is an early program, someone asked, was the Waukegan street photo that you showed with the streetcar Genesee Street.
Yes, that is actually dated to 1896, 1897.
Okay. And then someone else asked, what was the population of Waukegan when the Sesame Club started their mission?
I've got my book here, 18, it'd be about 5,000 people.
Oh, wow. So pretty small. So the other question that I had for you, and so this will be my last question for Ty for right now, and then I'll kind of transition to a larger question. But Ty, just for you, what do you think the biggest challenge that they faced? You talked about lots of them coming up for the Sesame Club and for getting this library going. What do you think the biggest challenge that they faced was?
They had a lot. But I have this this prologue that Ruth Gregory wrote in 1955, titled "The Power of Women in Waukegan's Past," and I think it kind of sums up this challenge. In this, Ruth Gregory said, "Generations of Waukegan women made plans, earned money to support their plans, and then talked their husbands into presenting those plans to whatever authority there might be. The women achieved their goals, the men got the credit and the presidency."
Wow. Wow, that's an incredible quote. Yeah, don't have much to say to that other than it's true.
A lot of
the women, yeah. Lots of challenges. And I think, yeah, just being women organizing the club, like you said, trying to get their husband on board and then seeing them take the credit is definitely a story there. And then we did get one other question, direct question on when will the Carnegie open? I think you said already you don't have a specific date yet, but
right, we don't have a specific date yet, but every day we're really getting closer. You're seeing a lot of things being able to happen now. So there's a lot of behind the scene things but now you're seeing the historic windows coming back in. The addition on the north is up, and soon the stone will be going up onto that. And then plastering in the interior is quickly underway here. So we're really ramped up to be in there later this year. We don't know the date yet, but it is coming.
Wow. I think everyone's very anticipating this new addition. Okay, so we will transition now to kind of an overall discussion and Q&A. So feel free for anyone to turn on your camera. You can raise your hand and Nicole will unmute you so you can talk. We can share questions and conversations. Will the presenters, we've gotten a few requests too. Will the presenters share any of the links that you have from your presentations tonight in the chat, ways that they can find you, ways they can go to either your museum, your site, learn more about you? We've gotten a few questions and requests for that. And then, like I said, we really want this chance just for you to interact with the presenters, interact with each other. So you're welcome to turn on, unmute yourselves. Before we officially begin our discussion too, I just wanted to thank everyone again for coming tonight. I want to give a special thank you to our presenters for putting together these presentations, doing the research, and sharing their local history information. It's so fascinating whenever I hear these stories of Lake County and the incredible work that has been done here, and how you just want to find out more and more and more about the unique lives of people who have lived here. So one other thing before I start asking my questions, I know I have some, I know I'm sure participants do, but if you have enjoyed tonight's presentations, I would love to see you again on the second day of the Lake County History Symposium. This will be Thursday, January 18th at 6:30 again, so same time, same place. And we will feature 3 new presentations. As I mentioned at the beginning, tonight we kind of had some groups and organizations. On the 18th, we'll have some more individuals, including Samuel Insel, who owned Cuneo Mansion. And then we also will have a presentation from the Dunn Museum that kind of similar to Ty's presentation today, share how we got started as a museum in Lake County, and a couple other historical society presentations as well. And I think it'll be another great presentation, so feel free to register to that. So I will start with my question, and I actually had this before Ty read that last quote too, that was really inspirational, but so many of you shared stories of women and women organizations. How do you think that either helped them become good neighbors and good citizens, or was it more of a challenge that your groups faced, especially as it went on in time? By the time, Marina, you're in the 60s and 70s, is that as much of an impact for these groups of women to come together and form organizations?
So for the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club, I didn't find anything specific about anything that was negative. It was pretty positive to the group. I think that one thing that really popped out to me, though, as I was doing the research, was how much nursing as a career was changing, and how women in nursing were fighting for so many benefits, educational opportunities, better pay, better working conditions. And so I think that was tied a little bit for the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club too, providing that space to think about those issues that the wider nursing community was really thinking about. I did find one interesting thing about the scholarships. All of the scholarship recipients I found were women, but they actually specified in the listing that it could be a man or a woman who could apply for the scholarship. But I couldn't find any evidence of recipients that were men that applied for the scholarship, just women. I thought that was a interesting tidbit there during the research too.
I thought it was very interesting hearing Ty talk about a women's club founded in Waukegan in 1894, like the Asole Club in Highland Park in 1894, but they had to choose names, almost surreptitious, advocate, as they're like stepping, putting their toes into the public sphere. And that's really what's happening. And because the woman of the Asole Club had said to the Highland Park Club, oh, let's have a women's club, there was no, and even then they were kind of made fun of. So I found that very interesting. And additionally, the first independent women's club in Highland Park also advocated for having a Highland Park public library paid for by Carnegie, but they tore it down in 1929. And all these parallel movements with park districts and how it was viewed in beaches. And But again, what it is with the auxiliaries, with the women's clubs, it's really stepping out for the first time into the public sphere, and having to learn how to negotiate that just to begin.
Yeah, not calling them women's club, but calling them the Sesame Club, the Zoli Club. Yeah. All right. So one question that I have for you, which is not so much historical, but what inspired you to research these groups tonight, or these individuals? What led you to your presentation tonight?
I can start. I think that as an archivist, my job is to preserve and make accessible primary documents. And when we do that, we learn more about these people, and we see how everything is tied to steps to what's going on in the local areas, in the nation, in the state, whether it's gender or park districts being formed. So for me, it's seeing how changes in community and growth community are related to larger trends that are documented in our collections.
I would just piggyback off Nancy a little bit. Yeah, it was partly the nurse Jean Starvos, who started the Nurses Club, put together a huge binder of things from their time in the Nurses Club with her other members. And so in our efforts to make things more accessible, and we're at the Raupp Museum, and we have begun digitizing everything and putting it online for people to see, I came across this story, and it was really interesting, and just continued with more research.
You know, for me, I mean, obviously consumed right now with this project of the Carnegie, but Park District wise, I mean, Park District has always been very proud of that early history with the women's club helping to get it going, and then just kind of seeing how and realizing the impact that the club had on getting the library established, and then the Park District, and how these things have merged into present day. Just thought it was perfect time to talk a little bit about it.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I see. Holly, do you want to ask your question?
I grew up in Niles, and so in 1961 I would have been 7, but I had no idea what's going on in Wheeling and Buffalo Grove, you know. Also, the Carnegie Library, I understand, I think they want to turn that into a Ray Bradbury museum, I think. Ray Bradbury was a science fiction writer who grew up in Waukegan, and that's what I heard about that. And the lending library, the lending closet, I had a special privilege to be able to see how that works, not in Lake County. I had lived in Southwest Wisconsin 2014 to 2016, and I was volunteering doing in-kind work for St. Vincent de Paul Thrift Shop. And in the warehouse where I was doing my work was this lending closet. And I would see how the social workers would come in, and the physical therapists and whoever they were, and they would very thoughtfully and very thoroughly take their time and look around and see what equipment could help their clients. And they would even ask me questions, and I couldn't answer because I really wasn't a part of it, but I would go race over and get one of my coworkers to come over and help. And then sometimes the retail customers from St. Vincent de Paul used to come in from Monroe, Wisconsin. Used to come in, they thought they were supposed to be in the warehouse, but they really weren't. So I was very nice and kind to them, and I would go get some help for them. So it was very interesting to see on a firsthand basis how important that lending closet is, because let's be honest, if you only need a pair of crutches once in your lifetime, why should you have to pay for this stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So, and Nicole, hi, Nicole. Good to see you again, darling. Happy and healthy New Year to all of you.
Yeah, it's interesting that that's the ideas still continue today.
Yes.
Ty, I don't know if you want to touch on the Ray Bradbury point at all that she made.
Yeah. So There have been other entities prior to the Park District and Historical Society that were focusing to do Bradbury centric at the Carnegie. The Park District Historical Society, our vision, what we are doing is going to feature Bradbury, but it will be much more, also telling the city's history too. But Ray, with that being his childhood library, one of his favorite places in the galaxy for him, we have that wonderful honor to tell that story. Give you a little sneak peek here. Behind me in my office, that is Ray's personal library.
Wow.
So that will be featured prominently in his favorite space in the Waukegan History Museum at the Carnegie.
Wow. That'll be really interesting to see. Sneak preview, everyone.
Sneak preview.
So Ty, I had another question that came in through for you. And they wanted to know any more thoughts about the parallels between the Sesame Club and the women's suffrage movement, specifically in Waukegan.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of parallels. I mean, the women of the Sesame Club, that wasn't just the only thing that they were doing. I mean, these were prominent women within Waukegan, within Lake County. So they were also working diligently on the suffrage movement as well. And realizing that a lot of their roadblocks, they just weren't able to have their own voice to vote on a lot of these things that they were trying to do. So pushing the suffrage movement plus what they were trying to do with the library, with recreation, with other things too. They were doing a lot of other social advancements as well. I just kind of talked about those too, but it was all in conjunction with each other.
Yeah. And anyone else, feel free to chime in as well. Feel free to share something that surprised you, something that you learned tonight, any personal connections or memories that were brought up in these presentations. Feel free to chime in with those as well. Oh, here's something else that just came in. And for Marina, it appears that women filled a huge gap in care in the community during a period of great transition. Any more or context on that, on the gap that they were filling?
Yeah, it was, they, as nurses in the school, they definitely identified that medical care, access to medical equipment was really lacking, and tried to fill that, and also access to nursing education. I'm not sure what else to add. They ran from about 1961 to 1979. And then shortly after that, access to a lot of those services were more widespread as the suburbs in that area grew really fast in the 70s and 80s. And so the Nurses Club dissolved after that. I'm not even sure what happened to the lending closet items, or if they ended up being donated to another facility. But yes, these women were providing really important education and medical services at a time when there was just the one volunteer ambulance going around.
All right, I just have a few more questions for you all. Again, feel free to chime in. So the stories that you shared tonight were about good citizens and good neighbors and those who impact the community and the local Lake County. Do you still see any of those groups that you talked about today continue their work? I know, Ty, you mentioned today the women's group still goes on, but how can you bring some of these historical figures or things from the past up to present day, and how do you think those individuals are still impacting our society? Like I said, Ty, you kind of touched on it, that the women's group still continues to help. are there still nurses clubs, Marina? I don't even, I'm not part of a nursing group, so.
I'm not actually sure. That's a good question. I'll have to look into that. I know at the time that the Wheeling Buffalo Grove Nurses Club was happening, there were a number of other different nurses club in the area, in McHenry and some of the other suburbs. So I think it was a widespread issue that people were seeing in the suburbs of access to medical information and medical services. They did in Buffalo Grove and Wheeling, they didn't continue past the 70s, but I think that they were they grew and supported nursing in general at a time when it was changing a lot as a profession. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that all of your presentations were focused on such significant changes of time. Like turn of the century, 1960 is just really those key moments in time that you think about. And you'll have to wonder like how today, with all the impacts that we've had going on, how people will look back at this time. All right, and we have someone with their hand raised. Jane, do you want to?
Two things. Number one, in answer to your question, such events as this event tonight, I think is helping continue all of this kind of stuff, which I think is very, very good. I belong to the Illinois Home and Community Education, which is through the University of Illinois Extension Service. As a state organization, we're turning 100 years old this year, and we're still going strong and active and hanging in there. And as far as our county organization, we're 90 some odd years into this. I think that would also be a very interesting program for you to present to the world. I've always said we're the best kept secret. Started out with the men in Farm Bureau, went to the ladies in Home Bureau, and went to the children in 4-H, all teaching agriculture and home economics. So if that's something you would be willing to want to know more about, I'd be more than happy to share you our history.
Thanks for sharing. I'm just looking through the chat too, and Marina responded to one just for those of you who don't have the chat open. Was there a particular reason the Buffalo Grove group chose to meet in Mundelein, given there was a school in Buffalo Grove? And then Marina, you just responded saying that you're not sure why they chose to meet there. And after the first meeting, they did tend to meet in Wheeling or Buffalo Grove schools. And then Nancy, I have another question for you. It's interesting to see the thread of good neighbors spread over decades in Highland Park. And do you feel that was unique to Highland Park in any way?
Well, I think many of the events are unique to Highland Park based on various socioeconomic factor and demographics. I don't think that it stands alone as having good neighbors or good practices. It was a multiple set of factors that allowed these things to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. All right, I have one final question, and then we'll kind of wrap it up for tonight. And I hope this isn't too big of a question, but because we're here talking about local history, local Lake County, and connecting it to the stories of individuals and groups that have made an impact here. But I just wanted to get your feelings after you've heard all these presentations and discussion tonight. Why does our local history matter? And why should we continue sharing our research on this local history? And should we keep, bringing up these stories of those who have made an impact? Like I said, big question, but.
Was that for the participants or for
yeah,
the
for
attendants?
anyone can answer. Yeah, feel free.
Well, archives and documentation can be found in so many places. There's church archives, there's community archives, there's subject archives, there's state, local, and they document and contribute in many different ways. So the answer is yes, both on a local and a larger scale. This is documentation of pieces of our heritage, our country, our democracy, and they tell us a story each in a different way, and it shows how it's enacted in your community and how your community is part of larger trends, whether it's because Illinois enacted, I think it's 1895, that's park districts allowed to form, and then you see a series of park districts forming. Public library acts in Illinois, you see the libraries forming year by year. So it's all tied together, and it gives us both a granular and a larger understanding of history.
I'll give everyone a moment to think about that too. But Barry, you have your hand raised. And you can go ahead and talk.
Hi, do any of your organizations have land acknowledgements regarding Native Americans? And if you do, can I get copies of it?
We do not. What we do is we gently share the pictures of the glaciation and the treaty to acknowledge them, and that's our way of having an acknowledgement without an official acknowledgement statement. There's some organizations, and I'll put a link in the chat, I'll pull those up, that do help craft acknowledgement statements.
So would you be open to having a land acknowledgement if it was crafted for your organization? And how would it be crafted? Would you be open to a land acknowledgement if some Native American affiliation was able to create one?
I would not be opposed to it. I would have to take it to the board, and it would have to be, and I've actually had discussions with the park district and the city about that in Highland Park, and we've really not gotten there yet. And we would gladly, the best answer would be to work with a Native American organization to do that, because it's their land and it's them they're acknowledging, so they should have a role in that, how that's done.
Mm-hmm.
Has this ever been brought up before?
Oh, absolutely.
But nothing's really been done.
Nothing's been officially approved, no. And that's why I always include the picture of that treaty from the National Archives and the glaciation. Just say, hey, we know we don't have official statement, but we know we're not first. Others were here before us. And I see that Lake County does have one. But that would be great. But also sometimes the land acknowledgements don't solve the problem of what happened previously. So definitely we would want it to come, anything that would be put out there would come with great input from the tribes.
Okay.
Nicole has posted the Lake County Forest Preserve's land acknowledgement statement, and that is used in presentations on forest reserve properties. So we don't usually do it for Zoom, since everyone's usually all over the place and not directly on forest reserve property. And we have it on signs in the museum and some of our welcome centers, and we're working on getting it more out on the panels in all the forest reserves. Marina and Ty, I don't know if either of you have a land acknowledgement.
We do not have one at the Raupp Museum, but it is something that we have been researching and considering. I've only been at the museum for a few years now, so it's something that's kind of come to my mind after we attended something at the Dunn Museum discussing their land acknowledgement, and how you went about developing that and working with tribes in the area to develop that. So that was really helpful for us in starting to think about if that's something that we want to, or how we would pursue that as well at the museum, and presented, as Nancy said, presented to our board, and move forward with that too. Yeah, something we're researching and considering right now too.
It's in the works for us as well, with the full intention to have that included at the Waukegan History Museum. And it, again, has to go through various boards and approvals.
Yeah, and it's not something that can happen overnight, and it should not happen overnight. It needs the time for research and process and thinking and reflecting, and should not just be a spur of the moment, thing. Let's write it and do it. Ours took almost a whole year to write, I think. So with back and forth discussions and conversations. But it is another important impact to show on local history that, what we talked tonight about, a lot of, the earliest ones started in the late 1800s here tonight, but, history was here before that. Groups were here before that. There's stories of individuals who I'm sure impacted those around them and worked to be good neighbors, even way back in prehistoric times to impact those around them. So Nancy has put her email in there. Any other presenters tonight, feel free to share information in the chat. I think a lot of you put that information there. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing and discussing this with me. I hope you walked away with some inspiration tonight, not only on how to be a good neighbor and stories of a good neighbors, but more stories of just why Lake County is unique and our history should be remembered and preserved and shared in all different aspects. So thank you again, everyone, for coming tonight. And I hope to see you at day 2 for 3 new presentations. Again, you can sign up on our website. And if you want to record or watch this recording, this will be posted on the Highland Park Historical YouTube page. And you can watch old presentations there too. The last year, which the theme was food and entertainment, I think it was food, something around food. So you can watch old presentations on their YouTube channel too, if you're interested. So thank you again, everyone, tonight. And I hope you take care and Happy New Year. Bye-bye.